Hey guys, thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Keto Answers podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Anthony Gustin, and joining me this week is Vanessa Spina. Vanessa is known as the Ketogenic Girl, and she is one of the first women that I've known to try the carnivore diet without having crazy autoimmune conditions. She also has tweaked a lot with a high protein diet for the ketogenic diet and has found other markers rather than her ketone levels that have helped her determine what her health outcomes would be. So super interesting episode. If you're stuck on a ketogenic diet, if you're looking to add some more protein or eliminate some things, this episode is for you. So tune in and I hope you enjoy. Before we get to the episode, I wanted to chat about our sponsor, Perfect Keto. Perfect Keto is all about making a ketogenic diet healthy and accessible. Whether you're reading all of our online guides or articles or enjoying Perfect Keto's exogenous ketones or any other keto-friendly products, everything you need to make keto work for you is at perfectketo.com. I know what you're thinking. Hey, aren't you the founder of Perfect Keto? Yep, that's right. And all of my insanely high standards have been put into making each and every product. My background as a functional medicine clinician helps me craft the cleanest and healthiest possible products and best information about a ketogenic diet. Head on over to perfectketo.com to learn anything you need to know about the ketogenic diet. And if you've never tried any of our products before, feel free to use the code KETOPODCAST for 20% off your first order. That being said, let's get into the show. Vanessa, thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Anthony. It's a pleasure to be here.
And you are in the US now?
I am. I'm coming to you from beautiful, colorful Colorado, which is the sign on the side of the road when you drive in from Utah. Welcome to colorful Colorado. It's a very beautiful state, as many people know. So.
Living up to the name, colorful Colorado so far? Good.
Yeah.
So one of the things that is interesting about where you're at now, so you live now in Prague?
Yes.
What was it like moving there, and as far as nutrition goes? Because were you into ketosis before you were there, or did you get into it while you were there? Like, what was that transition like for you?
It was really interesting because, I was vegetarian for most of my life, and I lived in Asia, and I lived most of my adult life, I should say, from the age of 17 onwards. And my parents used to live in Switzerland, and I remember visiting them and having a really hard time being a vegetarian in Switzerland. And I just found it was difficult to shop. It was difficult to find vegetarian meals. And granted that I was coming from Vancouver, which is like a vegetarian mecca. There's just so many vegetarian options. Like half the city is vegetarian. So it's very, very easy to eat vegetarian there. So when we were moving to Prague, I actually went back onto eating meat that summer, right before we moved, because I was doing keto for a while. I had been thinking about it, and I knew that moving to Prague, it was going to be so much easier to do that there. And the timing was just right because I'd been thinking about it for a while. And I do find it's extremely easy to eat keto in Europe. There's a Mediterranean influence. There's high fat cooking. In France, there's a lot of Parisian cooking in Prague, and they also love to eat meat there. So it makes keto very, very easy.
So you were keto before you moved there?
Yes. Yeah. So it was
kind of a vegetarian keto model, or
sort of pescatarian and egg vegetarian at the time, and had been doing that for quite a few years. And I think I had started to incorporate a little bit of poultry towards the end. So I had been gradually moving there towards it for so long. And everything that I was reading about nutrition and about keto was just propelling me forward, to go back onto eating meat. And so I made the switch right before we moved. And that was 3 years ago we moved to Prague. So yeah.
Why did you choose a ketogenic diet in the first place, or how did you get on that route?
I actually found keto through intermittent fasting. And I first had come across actually Tim Ferriss's slow carb diet. I don't know if you have ever come across that, but he talks about it in his book, I think the 4-Hour Body. And so I had started to do that. And at the time I was eating a lot of Chipotle. And so it was a really good fit because that's you can just live off Chipotle on his slow carb diet. Then I found Ari Hoffelmakers. I'm probably butchering his name, but he has more of a vegetarian approach, and it's still high carb. And it wasn't until I had been doing gluten-free, which I found through the fact that I was intolerant to gluten. I had been doing gluten-free, and I combined that together, and I just kept digging and found keto. And the keto and intermittent fasting go together so well, because when you're well nourished, as you know, you naturally start to fast between meals. So was like a very gradual transitions, but it's kind of like all paths were leading me to keto. uh, it to me, I really think it's the ultimate way of living and feeding yourself and nourishing yourself. So it kind of everything just kind of led me to it in the end.
So was it just curiosity, or did you have anything that you wanted to change as far as nutrition goes, is using it as a tool to reach a goal?
Yeah. So for me, the main thing was that I had crippling, like really intense pain in my abdomen when I was, whenever I ate gluten, which I found out through doing gluten intolerance tests. I talk about it more in my book, Keto Essentials, like my journey to finding out that I had gluten intolerance. And I had horrible throbbing arthritic pains in my hands. And I had myself tested for gluten. I went off of gluten for a few weeks just to try it. And the reversal was so powerful, so immediate that I was like, wow, there's so much more to this than I ever thought. And so I just kept digging, and that's kind of what led me to keto. And also, I had been going sugar free for a long time. So it was the combination of sugar free and gluten free together that is the perfect match, is pretty much keto.
And so did you start keto as a vegetarian or the pescatarian
I
and
did.
egg eating? Okay. And what got you down
Yes.
that route? Was it the Ari's influence that put you into that corner?
So I went vegetarian when I was 17, and it really was to do with animals and loving animals and being a big animal lover. And I don't know if it was, a lot of people call it vegan propaganda that was circulating at that time in my life, or what it was that really, propelled me forward. But a lot of it had to do with animal welfare. And I just felt like I love animals, so how can I eat them? And I felt like the two were mutually exclusive. So I decided to go vegetarian. But my health really, really suffered when I was vegetarian because I didn't do it properly. I didn't do it. If I were to do vegetarian now, it would look extremely different because I know so much more about nutrition. And, I studied nutrition as my electives in university. So I knew a little bit about it, but nowhere near as much as you need to know, I think, if you're going to do vegetarian or vegan diet properly to get all your essential amino acids and fatty acid needs met. There is a really, really proper way to do it. And I wasn't doing it that way. So my health suffered a lot, and I had no energy. I was overweight. I had struggled with always carrying an extra 30 to 40 pounds. And I also had this pain. And I was like, how am I ever going to live all of my dreams, especially wanting to have a family, have kids, have all these things, travel, if I'm always in pain? If I get back pain just from standing in the kitchen for too long, I just have low energy all the time, I'm tired, all these things. And it was through making these changes, going off gluten, going off sugar, starting intermittent fasting, that I started to see, major differences. And that just pushed me forward into going all the way into keto. And that was in 2014.
Got it. And then, so you fast forward again, you moved to Prague, and then you started adding meat back in. How was that transition to do that? Both, I guess, ethically and physically, how did you feel?
I think that it's difficult for a lot of vegetarians to go back to eating meat once they've been vegetarian for a long time. There's so many different aspects to it. Psychologically, I really dealt with a lot of guilt going back to eating animals. I remember being vegetarian and people would tell me that they went back to eating meat, and I really, I couldn't relate to them and understand. I would never do that. So it was a bit of a struggle at first, and especially I stuck to just the fish and poultry and eggs, because that was a lot easier for me to do. Eating red meat was more difficult, but over time, I just found that I felt better and better. And I also started learning about the bioavailability of nutrients and how high it is in red meat and in meat, and started feeling better and better, having more and more energy, better health in so many different ways. And I just knew that this was the right thing for me. And it's just been an incredible journey in the last few years, seeing my health improve so much, being kind of at my health goals that I was always trying to reach in other ways, and getting there very effectively with keto. And it is just such an incredibly nutrient dense, nourishing diet if you really do it properly, and really a lifestyle. I know a lot of people cringe at the word diet, but it really is a lifestyle.
Right. And so what were some of those health markers that you initially started to realize were changing once you started adding in back a little bit more meat?
Well, I would say that in terms of health markers, it was probably my energy was the biggest thing. And I've noticed a huge boost too with, trying carnivore and increasing my protein, which I know we'll get to as well. But I think the biggest shift for me was being pain-free, having stable blood sugar, which is a really cool thing. When you're eating more protein and fat, your blood sugar regulation is just very tight, and your mood is very much affected, I believe, from, blood sugar ups and downs. So having very consistent blood sugar and having consistent moods has been awesome. And, having that really high energy that, I think a lot of times I thought I had from drinking caffeine or from doing certain things, but it's different when it's a consistent energy that's coming from whole foods and eating whole foods, as opposed to an energy that's like dependent on caffeine or sugar, which is more adrenaline based, as opposed to more just your hormones are functioning really well and you are fat adapted. And so you have this consistent source of energy to tap into anytime. It's a totally different feeling and consistency of energy. And also mental clarity, I think, has been probably one of my favorite things about it. Is I've noticed a huge boost in my ability to focus, concentrate, and I've been really, really productive in the last few years. And I know that a big part of that is coming from that increased energy and also mental clarity.
But I think that, so I was reading your story, and I don't think that ketogenic diet always came super easy to you. If I'm, correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like you had some problems when you first started out. You gained some weight, things like that. Can you dive into that a little bit more?
Yeah. So I think the internet is so amazing because for curious minds, it just has an unending amount of information. There's so much information out there that you can find if you Google things, but that really has, good and bad aspects to it, because you can also just completely confuse yourself. And when I first started looking into keto, there weren't all these great books out there. There weren't all these fantastic podcasts like yours. There just wasn't that much information. I remember the hashtag for keto on Instagram, it really didn't have that many people following it. And so I would find keto information on Reddit, on bodybuilding forums, just anywhere that I could find info. And I was trying to piece together things and try to make it work for myself. And when I first started it, I thought the important thing was just having really high ketones. And I thought, that was the marker that I had to do. So I tested my ketones and I was eating all this high fat dairy, and I actually gained 20 pounds when I first started. Even though I was looking to lose weight and lose fat, I gained a lot of weight and I didn't understand why. And so that's kind of when I had to go back to the drawing board. I really invested a lot of time in learning and researching, but also testing my blood sugar and ketones and making correlations between what levels do I feel my best at, what levels do I get the most fat loss at, and how does that correlate back with my diet. And so I really just had to go be a guinea pig. And I still maintain that attitude towards keto and towards life. Is I'm constantly learning. I'm constantly learning more about my body and what is the best thing for it. But it's through trial and error. And I like that all the mistakes that I made, I can help other people avoid those mistakes and save time and not have to go through all of that, because it is, really time consuming to kind of flail around and try things. And I know how frustrating it can be if you think, well, I just need to have really high ketones and I'm going to get the results that I want. But then you realize, oh, there's this whole other side to the picture. It's not just having high ketones, it's also having low and consistent blood glucose and all these other factors that really, get you into that ketogenic state. And it's not just having high ketones on your reader that necessarily mean that you are fat adapted, or that you're burning your own body fat.
Right. And so you said that you noticed a little bit of a shift when you started eating different foods, when you had levels of ketones at a certain amount to optimize for you. And now everybody's individual, but what were the foods that you ate that brought you in a certain level, and what was that level, and what were the benefits that you saw at that level?
Yeah. So I think I can talk about how I evolved my keto diet from the beginning. So at the beginning, I was eating tons and tons of high fat dairy, tons of cream cheese. tons of, high fat, whipped cream, heavy cream, and a lot of foods that were kind of carb replacement foods. And it's really easy to overdo it when you're eating those kinds of things. And it's not, you may have really high ketones, doesn't mean that you're necessarily burning your own body fat. So some of the changes that I made were getting rid of the high fat dairy and just focusing more on actual protein and vegetables, and getting rid of so many of the carb replacement foods that I had. When I first started, I was so excited, to make keto breads and keto crepes and all these things so that I could pretend like I was still eating carbs in a way, trick my mind into thinking that I was still eating carbs that I loved. But it really was making that shift into just eating more meat and vegetables, which at first may have sounded boring to me. Going off of sweeteners, which I was really, really addicted to. I really replaced my sugar addiction with natural sweeteners, and going off of sweeteners. Also, I really, really enjoy savory foods and just making it really simple. When people freak out about how am I going to maintain keto while I'm on holiday or eating out, just ordering a protein with vegetables on the side, you're going to do really well on keto. If you're eating out at a restaurant and you're just doing that and you're focusing just on whole products or carbs or those kinds of things.
Yeah, I think people, when they switch to ketogenic diet initially, like you had, they tend to do a lot of these replacement foods and just see stuff on Instagram that looks good and start adding it back in. And I think that like a good point that you had is that it's not about addition of these weird keto replacement foods, but more about removal of everything else that you're eating. And this is what people don't realize a lot of times is like you get a lot of progress by removal, but not by addition. And so that I think is a key point, that when people get to that, whenever anybody's messages me and says they have a plateau that they're hitting and they're not reaching their goals, and they look at their Instagram and it's full of keto pizza and keto bread and fat bombs here or there, and it's like it's super simple. Where I say, eat things that grow, eat real food, and then try that for 2 weeks and let me know how it goes. And a lot of times it works.
That's so, so true. And one thing I think I'm thankful for, that there are these natural sweeteners and things, because I don't think I would have actually done keto or tried it if you would have told me that I'd be eating the way that I am now, because I was so, so addicted to sugar and to sweet foods and sweet tasting foods that I would have said, I just can't do that. But there's something that happens as you start to eat more real food. And so it becomes this gradual thing that becomes easier and easier to do, as opposed to just like, okay, tomorrow morning, I can never taste anything sweet again kind of thing, which would be, I don't know. I don't think I would have tried keto if it wasn't for, having those sweeteners and those carb replacement foods. So it does help make the transition. They do have a great role there. Yeah.
I think it's a giant spectrum, like people eating garbage at McDonald's every single day towards people eating just 100% real food, organic, grass-fed, everything.
Yeah.
Like I think there's a certain amount of spectrum in there. And I think that having
so true.
A ketogenic diet that has some of these replacement foods is certainly on a better end of that spectrum. But I think that as you inch your way forward, I think it's hard to skip a lot of steps. And I've been at this for a very long period of time as well. I mean, I started eating a whole paleo type of foods maybe 6-8 years ago now. And even before that, I think I was trying to be super healthy as well. And so I think that like people, if they're coming from a very standard American diet, it's tough to just flip a switch and snap your fingers and eat 100% ideal foods. But yeah, this is something that it's tricky to when you feel comfortable with it, what's motivating you to go forward, and to help bridge people from one type of keto to another, to kind of nudge them towards whole food diet, I think is ultimately what we all want to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so,
absolutely.
What were the levels you noticed that? I mean, did your ketone levels change when you stopped doing all the crazy fat additions? And did you feel better, or how is that as far as what you noticed subjectively?
The biggest thing for me is the blood glucose. That really made a big difference for me. So when I started developing my program, which was a 28-day challenge, I was a few years ago, I started, modeling it after the meals that I made that would give me the best results and keep me in ketosis. And for me, that was ketones of, between 1 and 3.0 I noticed they didn't have to be above 3.0. They didn't have to be excessively high. They came down at first when I started taking away, especially the high fat cream cheese. Like, I really overdid it on the high fat cream cheese. And I started taking that down. And I did notice, like I said, they came down, but my blood sugar really is the thing that was consistently low after making those changes. And when it is in the 70s and 90s for myself personally, that is where I see the best benefits. That's where I feel my best. I have the most mental sharpness, the most consistent energy, the best sleep, the best concentration, the best, fat loss and weight loss results. And so I always encourage people to focus more on testing their blood glucose than on focusing on ketones and having really, really high ketone numbers, because it doesn't necessarily mean that their body is reducing insulin, and that blood glucose is a better indicator to me that the body's insulin levels are going down. And so the body is getting out of being in a continuously fed state and more of a fasted state, which is allowing insulin to come down and glucagon to go up, which is, more the anabolic hormone, and you're in more of a fasted state where your body is then able to get out of fat storage mode and go into fat burning mode. And so to me, it really was focusing on having consistently stable and low blood sugar.
So what was your blood sugar when you were at the amount of, when you were eating the high cream cheese and stuff like that? And what were the levels that changed from there? So you said, between 70 and 90 was ideal for you. What was it before that?
Yeah. So I could always tell if I overdid it, and sometimes 100 or just a little over 100. And it just wasn't, I don't know if I was dairy sensitive also, but I think it was just eating too much food, eating more energy than my body actually needed in the form of both carbohydrate and fat. And I at the time, I thought it was also the protein. I've realized now it isn't. It's really more the protein, the fat and the carb that was excessive. But I could always tell the next day, the ketones would go down. They'd still be up, but the blood sugar would always be 90s or 100s.
So just by removing this and replacing with whole foods, you stabilize that. How long did that take?
Just right away from going off dairy, it made a huge impact. I think that it's really easy to overeat dairy too, because it's so delicious. And all of my meal plans, I make them dairy free because I just find that it makes it easier. I'm also an abstainer type personality. So, total abstinence is way easier for me than perfect moderation, which is a quote, I think, by St. Francis or St. Augustine. It just works a lot better for me to abstain completely from high fat dairy. But if I am in maintenance mode, then I will have some dairy if I want to. But if someone is in fat loss mode, or they're really trying to get all the benefits of being in nutritional ketosis, you can see results pretty quickly from reducing dairy, especially, cheese and the kind of foods, even heavy whipping cream. It's just really easy to overdo it on some of those foods.
So even if you don't have over gut symptoms from eating dairy, you think it's a good idea to remove for weight loss?
I think for weight loss, for sure, because, you want to tap into your body's energy stores. And if you are consuming a lot of energy in your diet, you just won't get there. And people talk about calories in versus calories out. There is an energy balance part of fat loss, and your body needs to utilize a certain amount of energy during the day. And if you are eating unlimited amounts of energy in the form of fat or carb, your body just won't tap into its fat stores, even if you are fat adapted, because it doesn't need to. So you may be producing ketones, but it won't be from your own stored body fat in the same way as if you bring the energy intake down. And on keto, you do that by reducing carbs. Firstly, you take down all the energy away from carbs. But if your fat levels are too high, then your energy intake from fat is also going to prevent you from accessing some of the stored energy on your body.
Yeah. I mean, this is one of the things that I tell people too, is that if they're looking to lose fat, especially, that removing dairy, even if you think you're not sensitive to it, is always a good call. So
yes,
it's good to be aligned there, I think. So you've made obviously a giant switch from where you started to where you are now. And so one of the reasons I think that would have been a good chat to get you on the show is that you're one of the only females that I've ever met that has elected to do a carnivore diet and stick to it without having crazy amount of autoimmune conditions. So carnivore diet is obviously really great for basically it being a massive elimination diet. So if you have any autoimmune conditions, removing everything that could potentially flare that up and going on a carnivore diet has been miraculous for some people. So what was it that got you interested in this originally, and what has your experience been thus far?
So I'm an optimizer, maximizer type of person. So I was like, well, if keto is doing all this for me, then, what else is there? Like, let me try, how can I optimize, maximize my quality of life, my energy levels, all these things even more. If there's something out there that offers that potential, I have to try it. And I also wanted to try it because I wanted to understand why people would be so crazy as to just exclude all plant matter from their diet. I just thought there has to be some valid reason for doing it, something that I don't understand yet, but if I try it, then I might understand it. And so I did several trials of it. I did a 7-day and then I did a month, and that was in the spring. And then I did a month starting in June, and I've pretty much been zero carbs since then. I did experiment a little bit with bringing vegetables back in after I kind of used it as an elimination protocol, but I have experienced what it is that people will talk about. There is this mood improvement that I had never experienced before. And I think for me personally, it all comes back down to food addiction. And I've experienced something that has been referred to as appetite correction. And I had never really experienced that before. I had tasted it a little bit with keto, where I felt more satisfied than I ever had. And I did have, lessening cravings for certain things, but I really got intrigued by listening to Dr. Ted Naiman talk about protein leverage, satiety, and how a lot of people have cravings for things and snack a lot because their protein needs are actually not being met through their meals throughout the day. And I thought, well, maybe after all those years of doing vegetarian diet and being protein deficient, I'm not getting the protein that I need to get. So I was like, I'm going to try this, going to zero carb and bumping my protein levels up as high as I can get them until I get kicked out. I want to see what that level is. I want to test that threshold because I had tested it before, but I was still eating carbs. So I wanted to test it at zero carb and see what that would do, see if I could stay in ketosis, see what levels I could stay in. And it's been an incredible experience for me. I've experienced a connection with intuitive eating that I haven't had since I was a child. And it's been amazing to just eat when I'm hungry and not eat when I'm not hungry. And I used to hear people talk about that kind of stuff and think, wow, they're really lucky. I could never have that. And I have experienced that. And for me, it has come through trying out zero carb. I don't know if it's something that I'm going to do forever, but I do know that right now I'm enjoying it. I'm enjoying biohacking with it. I've been doing a high protein experiment for the last week and a half, and I'm learning a lot from it. And I really feel that I have gone to the other side of my food addiction. Like it was almost cured, but I think with this, I just have no desire anymore for foods that used to really dominate a lot of my conscious thinking and a lot of my attention. And I really feel like I'm completely independent from them. And that's what I refer to as, this appetite correction, that I'm so in tune with my body and listening to it by feeding it just mostly protein and fat. My protein and fat needs, my essential amino acids, fatty acids are getting met so readily that I can hear when I'm hungry. I can hear when I'm full for the first time. And it's really been a beautiful thing. So I don't necessarily think that everyone should do carnivore or that anyone should exclude plant foods. For me, it was something I wanted to try.
So when you said that you were increasing your levels of protein to saw when it would decrease your ketone levels, what did you ever find anything from that?
Yeah, so that was really fun. I did that this week, and I went up to as high. This was really interesting. So I first went up to the highest level was 172 grams of protein I had in one day. And I did that twice. And then I went up to 180 grams of protein. And this was with just about 1% carb. So just trace carbs that were coming in the spices and in eggs. And I moderated the fat down a bit as well. So I was able to stay in ketosis this entire time. I have not been kicked out of ketosis this entire time doing this trial, even though I have spiked my protein up incredibly high. And I have had blood sugar in the 80s. There was a couple of days when it went into like 90 and 92, but then it went back down again, even after increasing protein even more. Because I wanted to see, okay, if I bump it up even more, am I going to get kicked out? And I haven't been. My ketones have been the lowest that they have been the entire time is 0.5. And that's the start of nutritional ketosis. So I've been posting those every day and just sharing the results. And then in the last 2 days, I bumped protein up, I said up to 180, and my ketones went up to 1.4 the last 2 days, yesterday and today. So almost as though my body is even adapting more to this high protein level. So it's been really cool to see the numbers and to kind of challenge them. And I always thought I was getting kicked out of ketosis before from eating too much protein. But for myself personally, it seems to really be the carbs, that if I control carbs to 0 to 1%, then I can eat unlimited amounts of protein. And it makes sense. It does confirm a lot of research that I had come across in interviewing a lot of scientists and experts and research I found online myself, that you can stay in nutritional ketosis with very high levels of protein.
So this is counterintuitive to what most people think, is that when you eat protein, it increases your blood sugar and it decreases your ketone levels. So I've obviously found the same exact thing when I was doing carnivore early in the year. My glucose was steady. It actually decreased over time. And then my ketone levels stayed exactly where they were at before and exactly where they've always been, which is between 0.8 and 1.2. And yeah. And so, I mean, I think there's some confusion in the space where some people say that it's not a ketogenic diet if you don't have 80+% fat in your diet. And we were chatting a little bit before we got recording here. And I think that the consensus for us, and I think that what makes a lot more sense, is that if your body is producing ketones and you're in a state of ketosis metabolically, I would consider that a ketogenic diet.
This is what I found really interesting too. So I was chatting with Amber O'Hearn about this, and some of the research she's come across is that eating higher protein can raise your glucose, but it doesn't raise your insulin. And I found this to be true because I just had my blood work done after doing all these weeks and weeks of carnivore, and my fasting.
That was gonna be my next question.
2.1.
Yeah, is blood work, because everybody freaks out, and if you don't have blood work done every 6 days on carnivore diet, then you're gonna die the next day. I think that's the experience that I had with it. So yeah, do you have any lab updates?
Yeah, so I had all my blood work done and everything looked fantastic. But the most exciting number for me was seeing my fasting insulin was 2.1. And it was extremely low, below the reference ranges. And my hemoglobin A1C was 4% or 76. So even though in the mornings I was seeing a little bit higher blood glucose than I was before, overall, the actual average, that's what, the hemoglobin A1C tests, over the last 3 months was showing a lower number. So I find that endlessly fascinating as well. And I do agree with you. I think we need to have a lot more research, a lot more studies done and information to understand all these different mechanisms. Because I know, for example, if you are a diabetic and your insulin and glucagon, are maybe not functioning in the same way, then eating more protein may raise your blood glucose, and you may have to make sure you always include fat with it so that the insulin doesn't, rise too much. But for myself personally, I'm not diabetic. I'm insulin sensitive. And clearly from these results, and it seems that I can eat all this protein, really like what you would qualify excessive protein, and still stay in nutritional ketosis and have really healthy, blood work, blood markers overall. So I think it probably varies quite a bit from person to person, but maybe being keto adapted, fat adapted for a few years, contributed to that.
So any changes in your lipid panel, thyroid, or hormones?
Everything was the same as it was before. So I didn't have any major changes there. I also had estrogen and testosterone tested. Everything was in the normal ranges for myself and what I normally see. So I only really saw improvements. And so I'm excited to keep testing, especially getting more blood work done after experimenting with these higher levels of protein, because I don't know if I'm genetically predisposed to eating meat. That's another thing that's interesting to me. But, I may just be making up for many years of being protein deficient. And that could also be part of it. But it's just really interesting that we can all test different things on ourselves. We can get different data on ourselves and find, what works optimally for us as individuals based on what our health history is like and what our current health is. But I've only seen improvements in doing this. So I've been really encouraged and excited, to keep trialing with it. And I love that I can stay in ketosis, with these high levels, as long as carbs are completely controlled, from 0 to 1% for myself. So I'm very carb sensitive.
And then are you focusing on your meat quality pretty exclusively as far as grain-fed versus grass-fed, or what is your approach there of the quality of the meat you're getting?
I am, because I do think that if you are getting most of your food primarily from meat, that you do have to pay a little bit more attention to the food quality. And so I'm also supplementing with desiccated liver capsules, like grass-fed beef liver capsules, to make sure that all of my nutrient needs are being met. I know that most nutrients are more bioavailable from animal protein than from plant sources, except for vitamin C. It's the only one that you need to supplement. But there's also a lot of research out there saying, or not, I don't know if there's research, but more anecdotal results and speculation that vitamin C levels may be lower. Maybe you might need less of them when you are not eating any carbs, because you have less, antioxidant requirements. So there's also a lot of interesting information about that. But overall,
one of the things there too is that vitamin C and glucose kind of compete for each other, and so you essentially when you eat carbohydrates, they have very similar pathways and how they're metabolized, and so you need more vitamin C if you're on a carbohydrate high diet. Same thing with manganese. Same story there, is that the pathways are very similar to carbohydrate metabolism and vitamin C and manganese and a few other nutrients. And so that is, something to consider, is like, do we need the same level of nutrients? Is our body skewing and needing a lot more to process certain foods or certain pathways when we're on certain types of metabolism? I think that we just don't really have the full picture there yet.
That makes so much sense. And I'm just really enjoying playing with these different things and evolving my approach to eating whole foods. I know that I'm not potentially going to be excluding plant foods forever, but that when I do eat plant foods, if I continue to do that, it's going to be more focusing on vegetables and not so much on some of the carb things that I really love, like dark chocolate and coconut butter. It's going to be more just focusing on nutrient dense vegetables and keeping my protein levels at the upper end of my, protein range for myself, which I've established now is a lot larger than I thought it was before.
One of the things that I've done after I was done with the carnivore diet is I've added in a lot of low fiber vegetables. And so that's where I try to get my sources from now. And I'd still say that my protein is way higher than it was before. I just feel way better on it. And I've actually, now that it's been a few months, strength has just been crazy at the gym. My body composition has improved even more without tracking calories or food input. And I just think that I'm still getting a lot of the same benefits as it was before, with having a little bit more of a flexibility. So instead of huge salads, I'll do some steamed greens or sprouts or microgreens or things like that, or some avocado or high fat foods. Avocado is probably the highest fiber food that I get now.
Yeah, I saw you posted one meal, maybe it was this week, that had some sprouts on it, and I know those are really nutrient dense. And I think it's so cool to just change things up and maybe not focus. I know for myself too, on the vegetables that were full of fiber because I noticed that I had a difficulty digesting them, and I just pushed through it all the time because I was like, no, I have to eat the cruciferous vegetables. I have to eat, these veggies that are high in fiber because I'm told that they're the best ones for you. And yet I always had such a hard time with my digestion because of that. And it's been really refreshing to just say, well, maybe these ones are not the ones that are best for me. Maybe I need to focus on sources that are, easier for me to digest.
And so how do you deal with it where you used to be an animal lover and not wanting to do this? And like, this is one of the biggest things that I have pushed back on with Carnivore Diet is that, you're killing other things, blah, blah, and this is a problem. Like, how do you reconcile your previous point of view versus where you're at now, eating pretty much exclusively animal products?
I honestly, to be fully honest, like I struggle with it because I was vegetarian for so long, and I do really love animals. And I just don't know if that has to be two mutually exclusive things. Some of the things that help me feel better about it are, I know that I feel better overall, and I don't have a lot of, some of the anxiety that I used to have, which caused a lot of mental suffering and anguish for me. I know that I think overall, if we have maybe a better relationship with animals and with eating ruminant animals and a better relationship in terms of taking care of animals and animal welfare and making sure that they're humanely raised, humanely slaughtered. And I try to get most of my meat from local farmers. In Prague, it's really, really easy to do that. And if we do move back to North America at some point, I'm probably going to work with a similar group, some kind of farm share or, delivery service or something that you can subscribe to, because I think it's really important to have a connection with your food. I would love to actually, I joke about this a little, but I would love to learn to hunt, which sounds so crazy to me from where I used to be so against hunting, but hunting to eat and nourish yourself, not sport hunting. Like, I would love to learn how to bow hunt. I would love to learn how to actually do these things with my own hands and feel that connection more with animals. And I know that at some point my body will be somehow decomposed and contribute back to the food chain. So there's certain things that I definitely think about. It's important to support farmers that have, the most humane practices as opposed to, factory farming where possible, and do those things and vote, with your money in terms of supporting those groups.
Yeah, I'm going to go on a hunt here in Austin actually in a couple of weeks. That is, we're going to do everything, and we're going to do all of the field dressing on like right out there. And it obviously it's not for sport. It's just like I'm going to try to eat pretty much exclusively food that I've hunted or caught myself. And
Wow.
so that's going to be kind of going into the fall and into next year.
That's amazing.
It's another thing too, like just being closer to it. And like, I don't know, people are so far removed from where they get their food these days. And like, I think that it's probably always a good idea to move in the other direction rather than away from that.
Yeah, I would love, I remember as a kid, one of my favorite things to do was to fish and then, sit around the campsite and we would fry up, rainbow trout that we caught in the lake. And there was something so satisfying about that whole experience that really stayed with me over the years. And so I really admire you for doing that. And also, I don't know what verbiage you used exactly there, but it sounds like you're going to also be like preparing the food yourself and kind of being part of the whole process.
Yeah, it's been pretty wild. Excited. And I know you work on a lot of stuff currently. You have a lot of programs and products and books and everything, but are you working on any sort of carnivore based things to release to help people out with this transition?
So I've been running my 20-day challenge for the last 3 years, and I am right now working on a revision to the program, which is going to be available to anyone who has been on the program for a while or who is just starting, who wants to try doing a higher protein, more moderated fat and lower carb approach, because I've seen such great results from it myself. I'm calling that the phase 2 plans to the 28-day challenge. So anyone who wants to try it out for themselves I think it's going to be really effective for breaking through any stalls that people have, or just taking their, energy levels to the next level and seeing if higher protein, lower carb, and a little bit moderated fat maintains their state of ketosis like it has for me. I'm okay personally with having lower ketone numbers because I've seen my blood work results and how good they are. And I see how I feel and how awesome it is. So as long as the diet gets you into ketosis, I think that, it's going to be really exciting to be able to share some of the things that I've learned, in these phase 2 plans, part of the 20-day challenge.
Awesome. Thank you for doing that. It's one of the things that I've wanted to get around to, but I have too much on my plate right now and I just have no time for it. So I appreciate you taking the time and effort to do that. Where can people find that?
That's all going to be at ketogenicgirl.com, and really excited to release those.
Awesome. Well, where else can people find you, Vanessa?
So my most active feed is on Instagram. It's at Ketogenic Girl. You can also go to the Ketogenic Girl on Facebook. I have a cookbook called Keto Essentials, which you can find on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and at certain Costco's. And you can also find me at ketogenicgirl.com. And I also have a podcast, which is called the Fast Keto Podcast. And I had a lot of fun interviewing you on there as well. So loving all the podcasts. It was great to be here with you guys today.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking the time. All right, everyone. Thanks for listening to another episode of the Keto Answers podcast. I hope you enjoyed it, but even if you didn't, I would love a review. Go over to iTunes, wherever you listen to your podcast, and pop in a review so we can get found by more people, get better guests, and have the information that you need. So please go to iTunes, wherever you listen to your podcast, and leave us a review. And if you're new to keto, head on over to perfectketo.com/podcast and enter your email for all our top tips and guides on getting started with the ketogenic diet. Thanks, and we'll see you next time.